Hello, welcome. In today's video, we're going to make an updated tier list of 3DS and Nintendo Switch emulators for Windows. We're going to test most of the available emulators, talk about them, rank them from worst to best, and also show what each one has to offer. Starting with the Nintendo 3DS emulators. Currently, we have several available, mostly forks of the now-defunct Citra. We can say that, in Citra's case, the work done after the emulator's shutdown has been excellent in most situations, with developers bringing performance improvements, fixing games that used to be problematic, and adding new features. However, not everything is perfect. There are also some challenges faced by the community. In this tier list, we'll evaluate not only performance but also ease of use. In other words, if an emulator makes it harder for users to run their games, it will lose points. That said, let's move on to the tier list. Also keep in mind that everything here is based on my own experience. If you have a different opinion, that's totally fine. I'm not here to force you to follow my tier list, but rather to give you some guidance if you don't know where to start. Starting with Borked 3DS. This is an emulator that wasn't very well received by the community, but its goal was to take everything delivered by other projects and combine it all into one. In other words, it would grab everything that Lime 3DS and Mandarine implemented and merge it into a new emulator. This could either work very well or cause a lot of incompatibilities, since it tries to implement various things at the same time without prior testing to ensure everything works smoothly. The current status of this emulator is that it basically hasn't received updates for 2 months. Along with the uncertainty about whether all PRs were properly tested, it will be placed in Tier C. Another fork that I can already tell you is no longer worth using is Citra in its last version. All other forks have received many fixes, such as better shaders and superior compatibility with games that had problems on Citra, like Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. Unless you're feeling very nostalgic, it's no longer worth using Citra, as it has become outdated. Therefore, it also goes to Tier C. To finish off the emulators that I don't recommend, let's talk about Panda 3DS. Keep in mind that this emulator hasn't been released yet, it's still a work in progress, and that's why it's in this position. Depending on how it evolves over the next year, it can definitely move up on this list. For now, the emulator still has several issues, especially graphical ones. Overall, it's easy to install and get running, but I recommend avoiding it until it improves a bit more. Moving on to Mandarine. This emulator previously had other names but changed at least twice, which caused some confusion within the community. Early in its development, Paolo MK7, developer of Azahar, accused Mandarine of stealing his code without giving proper credit. This doesn't invalidate what the emulator has become, but it did create some drama in the community last year. Fortunately, something that no longer happens. Overall, this emulator currently has one of the best performances, along with solid and continuous development. That's why we're putting it in Tier S. Cytrus is an emulator developed by the same creator of Sudachi. You'll still hear me talking a lot about him when we discuss Nintendo Switch emulators. What I can say is that, so far, there's no good reason to use this project, since other forks do the same but with lower resource demands. Again, the project may improve, but I have low expectations since Jared works on several projects and can't give full attention to all of them. So far, there has only been one release of this emulator, so it looks like the project has stopped. Therefore, Cytrus goes to Tier B. Lime 3DS is also an emulator, like Citra, now considered outdated. For those who don't know, Lime 3DS merged with Paolo MK7's fork in the past, forming Azahar. Overall, Lime 3DS already has outdated features, and its performance has been vastly surpassed by other forks, such as Azahar itself and Mandarine. It was even removed from the Play Store, being replaced by Azahar. That's why it goes to Tier B. Now let's talk about Azahar. Azahar had everything to be the best project we currently have, but it introduced an obstacle for users. Previously, and in all other projects, it was possible to run games in the .3ds format, which is the most commonly used and found on the internet for already decrypted games. However, Azahar came with an anti-piracy method, even for a console that is already considered abandonware. I'll leave you to reflect on that. Basically, you need to rename .3ds files to .cci, and in theory, that should work. However, some games, especially bad dumps or fan translations, stopped working, even after converting the games again, using the tools recommended by the developers themselves. Other than that, Azahar has impressive performance, even ahead of Mandarine, which had already shown excellent performance up until now. However, due to the problems caused for users, it will go to Tier A. Finally, let's get to another controversy, Azahar Plus. Well, Azahar Plus is exactly the same as Azahar but with the return of the emulator's ability to run games in .3ds format. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes these files may have issues when running on the original Azahar, either because they're bad dumps or for other reasons. Additionally, Azahar Plus allows you to download the necessary files for the emulator to work on some third-party networks, such as Pretendo, for online play, something that, on Azahar, is only possible using actual 3DS hardware. Azahar Plus does everything the original Azahar does, but without the nonsense of the anti-piracy system and, on top of that, it has superior performance compared to the others. That's why it also goes to our Tier S. And that's our complete tier list. Just a reminder, all the emulators mentioned here will be available on our Patreon blog, which you can access for free, without needing to create an account, and you can download them directly from the developers' websites or GitHub repositories. The links will always point to the latest versions of each emulator. If you want to buy original games while saving a lot, check out Instant Gaming, the digital store that sells games for various platforms, such as PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch. Get games of all genres with discounts of up to 95%. You'll also find a variety of gift cards and credits for other services. You can pay for your order through your credit card on a website with a 4.7 rating on Trustpilot. You're buying games directly from Instant Gaming, not from other retailers. If you encounter any issues, Instant Gaming offers 24/7 support. And this month, Instant Gaming is offering a great discount on the newly released Monster Hunter Wilds, with up to 51% off, ensuring the lowest historical price for the game. Check out the price comparison with Steam's pricing. What are you waiting for to save? Links in the description. Now let's move on to the Nintendo Switch emulators. I have to admit, this part was much more difficult than ranking the 3DS emulators, because pretty much all of them are good in some aspects while others excel in different areas. In short, the existence of multiple projects ends up complementing what the others lack. The first ones we need to mention are actually two, the old Yuzu and the old Ryujinx. It's not that they're completely obsolete, but nowadays there's virtually no reason to use them. Especially Yuzu, the latest versions have received significant improvements and offer much better compatibility with current games. On top of that, the old Yuzu may face issues running firmware 19. As for Ryujinx, it also lacks proper support for the most recent firmwares. What's more, even though it hasn't been widely publicized, the current Ryujinx forks offer much better performance, especially if you have an AM5 CPU. So, unless you have a very specific reason to run a game that has become incompatible, you really shouldn't use the old Yuzu and Ryujinx anymore. Another emulator that has gone through a lot of controversy and hasn't been updated for nearly 2 months is Citron. The project faced a major shakeup when one of the lead developers, Camille, decided to leave and publicly accused the project leader of appropriating his improvements without giving proper credit, among other allegations, which I'm sure most of you already know about. The emulator's performance in its last version, 0.6.1, introduced several regressions, as this was one of the releases where Camille was no longer leading development. Currently, the project has been inactive for almost 2 months, and I'm not sure they still have a capable team to continue evolving it. So, for now, Citron is going into Tier B. Next up is Sudachi, maintained by Jared, who is also the developer behind Cytrus, as I mentioned earlier. It's safe to say that Sudachi is a solid Yuzu fork. However, since it's being developed by just one person, things tend to progress more slowly. Not that most games don't get patched quickly, in fact, they usually do, often on release day, but the addition of new features is quite rare, simply because the developer doesn't have much time available. That said, since we're ranking purely on usability and performance, Sudachi earns a spot in Tier S. Now let's talk about the emulator with the least development time on this list, Eden. When I mentioned Citron earlier, I explained how Camille, one of the main developers, left the project after conflicts with the Citron leader, and then he went on to found Eden. If we were only talking about the Android version, Eden would definitely stand out for its many innovations. However, the Windows version has brought compatibility with some games, but its performance is still below Sudachi and only slightly ahead of Citron. Still, considering that it's in a pre-alpha stage and shows a lot of potential, we're placing it in Tier S. Now, moving on to the controversial Ryubing. For those unfamiliar, Ryubing is a Ryujinx fork that aims not only to preserve everything Ryujinx achieved but also to slightly improve certain aspects. Depending on the power of your CPU, this emulator can deliver everything the Nintendo Switch has to offer at its best. But there's a big problem: its leader. He's someone who has often been rude to the community, including some of my friends, fellow developers, and even several members of my own community. Greem is widely regarded as rude and abrasive, and he's been losing the community's respect more and more with each passing day. Do I recommend Ryubing? Absolutely. But if you want to avoid toxic environments, you might want to steer clear of this project. Still, since we're evaluating only performance and usability, Ryubing definitely deserves a place in Tier S, especially if you have an AM5 CPU or another high-end processor, as you'll get unbeatable performance with minimal issues. However, given that users might face difficulties when reporting bugs or seeking help, we'll place it in Tier A. Now let's talk about Torzu. First, I want to thank AlexIndex again for his preservation work. Thanks to him, projects like this one are still accessible. Torzu is being developed by a small team on the deep web, which means it's practically immune to takedown risks from Nintendo. The lead developer has already proven that he knows what he's doing, having contributed to several fixes that other Yuzu forks have implemented in their projects. Unfortunately, communicating with the developer can be challenging for those of us who prefer to stay on the surface web. I personally have direct contact with him, but I haven't yet figured out how to streamline that communication to better relay community feedback. So, for now, we'll place Torzu in Tier A until we can establish a more open channel to communicate with the developer. And before you blame just the lead developer, know that I'm also partially responsible for this lack of communication. Finally, let's discuss a very promising project that's available for Windows, Android, and other platforms, kenji-NX. Basically, kenji-NX offers everything Ryubing does, except for the developer's toxicity. Keaton, the person behind kenji-NX, unlike Greem, is extremely helpful to the community and stays informed about other projects. This project has everything it needs to be the best one currently available. However, the developer is essentially a one-man army, juggling work across multiple platforms while also balancing his personal life, which leaves little time for development. With almost the same performance as Ryubing, often trailing by just 4 to 5 FPS, it's a very promising project, especially for those with a high-end CPU. So, that wraps up our complete tier list. The images, for those who want to save them or share them on other social media platforms, will be available for download and free to use however you like. And just to emphasize, this is purely my personal list. If you have a different one, feel free to share it. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to hit the like button, because making this kind of content takes a lot of effort. And if you enjoy this type of content, subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.